Hello and welcome to All Things Women's Health. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stroud. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I'm a small business owner. I'm a Catholic. I'm a lot of things. But right now, I'm your host as we talk about really all things women's health, from childbirth to infertility, from pregnancy loss to menopause, from personal trainers to homeschooling curriculums. If it involves women and their health, it's on our agenda. And joining me today are two very special people, one of whom I'll bet most of our listeners already know, certified nurse midwife Rachel Maio and her husband Collin. Are we going to talk about all things nurse midwifery? Maybe, but even much more than that. We're going to talk about their rather colorful experiences with their births, their birth plans, and how they coped with the need to change those birth plans. Sometimes those changes can be dramatic and radical, and we're going to talk about that today. So get comfortable as we get to know a lot more about Rachel and her husband Collin and their journey to here, to midwifery, to parenthood, and to understanding when plans change. We'll be right back with All Things Women's Health. Well, Rachel and Collin, welcome to All Things Women's Health.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so it's not every day that parents sit down and talk about all of their birth journeys. So
No.
I'm hoping that the next one won't be worth talking about.
it'll be boringly mundane.
Yes.
So, let's start maybe with a little bit about birth plans in general.
Sure.
I think we hear patients in our practice sometimes will say, or they've been told, don't plan your birth. It's just a waste of time. Plans are going to change and you'll be disappointed. And whenever I hear that, I'm tempted to say, would you offer that same advice about your wedding?
Right.
We tend to plan big things, but if you're going to get married outside in June, you plan for rain. You build in some contingencies. But what's your experience been in your career with birth planning in general?
Sure. So I would echo that and would agree that there can be some cynicism surrounding birth planning, like, oh, here's the birth plan, well, let's just, put that in the shredder. But I do think that it is such a worthwhile endeavor to think about planning your birth. It helps you flesh out with your partner, your husband, with your family, what you want your birth to look like. And once you've got a framework to go off of, you can adjust that to whatever your circumstance might be, but you have to know what's important to you and what you want out of that experience.
Yeah, I always say to patients, if you don't know what you want, we won't know how to get it for you.
Yeah.
And we won't know if we were successful or not because we don't know what the goal was.
Sure.
And it can be challenging. And I sometimes think the process of the birth plan is more important than the plan.
Yes, I would agree.
Does it matter to you who gives the baby their first bath? I don't know. We never thought of it. Well, suddenly now you're thinking of it.
Sure.
But it can be tricky.
It
can take some work. So, travel back in time to the two of you pregnant for the first time. Do you remember thinking, what do we want our birth to look like? Or what did you think then?
So we did have a birth plan with our first. We actually had a doula with Evelyn. And so we did have a very formal birth plan.
So Collin is a non-medical spouse. Do you remember things that Rachel was asking you about birth planning?
I remember mainly debating the question of whether or not to do a water birth at home, because at the time we were living in a duplex, but it was split.
Oh, yes.
It was split upper floor, lower floor, and we had the upper floor, so there was a lot of debate about whether the upper floor could hold a tub of water that size.
Right.
And we ended up deciding it wasn't worth the potential mess and all of that.
Well, I don't know if that's why we didn't decide to do a home birth. But
that's what I remember.
So we had actually interviewed a home birth midwife group, and we lived in Columbus, Ohio at the time. Yeah. And I had always thought that I would have a home birth. I just, when I get pregnant, I'm having a home birth. That's just is what it's going to be. Yeah. But something inherently didn't sit right as I was interviewing this home birth midwife. I was like, I've always thought you would be who I had my baby with, this group, but it just didn't feel right. And so that was the first time that we probably made a change to our plans, and just listening to my intuition, I said, I don't know why, but I think I need to be in a hospital setting.
I mean, that's probably, it's not exactly on our topic, but it seems like a really important takeaway for listeners that are thinking about, maybe they're not even pregnant yet, this idea that I'm going to do a little bit of investigation before I pick my provider group. And I might even go and interview them.
Yes.
And if you tried to have a visit like that and they weren't interested, that might be something that you'd want to know.
That might be a red flag.
Yeah, I think I would argue the same is true of pediatric providers.
Yes.
If they don't want to talk to you about your questions now, maybe they don't want to talk to you about them later as well.
Exactly.
So you made a big change right early on.
We did, and I loved them as a group. I loved talking with them and meeting with them. It just didn't feel right, and I had to listen to that gut feeling.
So you changed from that to maybe a more traditional.
Yeah, so we switched to a planned hospital birth. They offered water birth at the hospital, so that was interesting to me. And it was a midwifery-based group.
Okay.
So I still got a lot of what I wanted. It was the hospital I was working at, and that felt like the right fit for that pregnancy.
Yeah. Do you remember any of those early conversations? I think because most spouses are going to be non-medical spouses typically. Do you remember those conversations and thinking, am I supposed to know this stuff? I don't seem to.
I went into it with the attitude, this is her area of expertise. Sure. I'm going to defer to her knowledge. I think you did pretty much all the planning, and I was just there to do whatever I had to do to make it happen.
I find that's particularly a good strategy for family vacations as well. A little bit off the topic, but if listeners need advice there, I think that strategy works beautifully. The
stronger both people's opinions are, the harder it is to decide what you're going to do.
Yeah, but you were, I remember reading a couple books together just to help talk through things and to help you understand what was going on, what was happening, what the options were. Yeah. And so I always felt like you were very involved with the decision making.
Do you remember if there was something that stood out to you in that first pregnancy that was really critical? We just have to do this or not do this.
No, I just wanted to come home with a healthy wife and a healthy baby.
Right.
And to be honest, we'll get to this part of it. But to be honest, I'm sure there is a lot of stuff actually that I probably could have answered on that. Yeah. But I forget almost all of it because what overshadows all of it is what ended up happening in reality.
Yes. Yes. Our reality was a different one.
Very different.
So you progress through pregnancy. You're planning as you go.
Yeah.
You think you've got things kind of figured out.
Oh, I thought I had him totally figured out. Are you kidding?
Yeah, and spoiler alert, things took a turn.
They did.
We better talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I was the definition of a healthy, low-risk pregnancy. And as a young woman, I had never had any reason for medical care. So why would pregnancy be any different?
Oh, sure.
So there's this sort of invincibility that I think I carried into labor and birth. Why wouldn't I have a normal delivery? And it took a big shift in my mindset, and there was this vulnerability that came with the changes that happened that I had to reckon with.
And at the time, you were a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit, right?
I was.
And so you saw when things don't always go well.
Yeah.
But you thought,
but it wasn't going to happen to me.
That's not me. Right.
Right. Why would I have any reason to suspect that?
Well, then share with listeners how things started to go.
So I was 35 weeks pregnant, 35 weeks and 4 days, and I developed severely high blood pressure to the point that I actually had not one but 2 eclamptic seizures.
Wow!
And so that was
with any warning.
I would say almost no warning. Now the plot thickens as it always does.
A few hours of warning.
Yeah, so in working in the NICU, I was having neck and shoulder pain from working in the isolates all the time. And so I went to the chiropractor for the very first time ever. Yeah. He did an adjustment. He said, okay, a lot of patients are a little sore the next day. You may or may not have a headache. I went to work a night shift. One of the seasoned nurses took one look at me and she said, you look swollen. She said, what is your blood pressure? And I was offended.
Of course.
What? I said, I was seen this week in the office. My blood pressure is fine. I know I look a little puffy, but I'm pregnant. Aren't I supposed to look a little puffy? Sure. So she knew. She took one look at me and she said, you are one sick lady. And I blew her off. She still doesn't let me live that down. And so I went home. I went to bed. So this is going into the daytime hours. I was on night shift, and I woke up with a headache.
Oh.
And I think I called you next.
Called me.
I called him. I said, "Gosh, my head, it really hurts." I was complaining about it.
And I think I'll pick up from here because we'll see why in a moment.
Well, yeah, you offered to come home.
I think you had complained about it, and I don't remember exactly how I responded to that, but I went back to my desk and kept working, and about half an hour before the close of business, it was not sitting right with me, because the thing was, back then, when she was still relatively well rested, she never got headaches.
Oh,
No,
sure.
it was very unusual.
Never in her life.
No history of
So
you had a sense
the fact
something's
that
not right.
the fact that she was having not only a headache but a pretty severe one and a fairly persistent one,
Well,
that
so
didn't sit right.
in my defense, okay, so I woke up with a headache. I took Tylenol and I took a warm bath, and it got better, went away.
Yeah.
So I said, "Oh, Rachel, I'm a great minimizer. All right, it makes me a great employee. It makes me a terrible patient." But it went away. So I thought, well, this can't be pre-eclampsia because my headache got better. It went away. So I went back to bed.
Oh.
Meanwhile, I had the feeling something wasn't right, because persistent went away. I didn't know it had gone away because she didn't call me back after that.
I just went back to bed.
But I knew that she had a headache, and that wasn't normal, and something wasn't sitting right. So I told my supervisor, "Hey, there's only half an hour left.
Yeah.
All of our work is done for the day. Can I just go? Like, something's not right. Can I just go home?" So I left early, and thank God I did, because I pulled up to the house and start walking up those steps to our, the front door of our upper duplex, and I hear crying from somewhere in the building. And I wasn't sure what was going on, but I walked into the bedroom and found her on the bed crying. And to shorten that part of the story, basically spent the better part of 45 minutes trying to get out of her what was wrong.
Wow.
And all she would say was, "Something's wrong. I'm scared. What time is it? What day is it?"
Oh, my.
Those 4 things over and over.
So while he was on his way home, and by the way, the fact that he had left early, a half an hour, actually put him home an hour early because of rush hour traffic.
Oh, sure.
And at some point, I woke up. The headache was back. Worst headache of my life. Never felt anything like it. And I sat up in bed and had my first seizure. I felt my arm go numb, and I could see
But
it
you were
kind of
alone at this
moving.
point.
I was alone. I was home alone.
Wow.
And thank God I was in bed and not the bathtub.
Yeah.
But I had my first seizure, and then I don't know what. The next thing I remember is Collin walking through the door.
Wow.
So that sparked some memory, but I was completely disoriented. I must have asked you 5 or 6 times. I can see I'm pregnant. How pregnant am I? When is my due date? How many weeks pregnant am I?
Wow.
And what day is it? What
And that
time
had
is
to
it?
be
You were
And
worried.
he would answer, and then I would forget that I had asked. I couldn't remember.
You were really worried about the baby too. And so again, this is
Because
where
I
my
knew something bad had happened. I
Right.
said, I don't know what happened, but it was bad, and I
It
can't
had to be
remember.
so unnerving for you
It was
to be
very
witnessing
unnerving.
all of this.
Well, that's where my lack of medical expertise comes in, because if I'd had a whisper of medical expertise, I would have just gotten her right to the hospital. But I thought maybe she just woke up from a nap and was disoriented, until it went on for about 20 minutes and then kept going. All right, something's clearly not right, but I didn't know what to do.
Well, and you had asked a friend to come over as well.
At that point, I called her friend Brittany, she's a fairly good friend of both of ours at this point. And it was somebody else who was intelligent, cared about Rachel, and had some medical knowledge.
And lived very close by.
Yeah. So please, I need help figuring out what's going on here. Please come over. And well, the upshot of the whole thing was that we ended up calling the OSU midwife and just advised us to head into the hospital. So we got in the car.
They got me calmed down enough that I was able to piece together. Said, I don't know what happened, but I might have passed out. I don't know, but maybe that's what happened. So the midwife said, well, I don't know what's going on with you. She couldn't piece it together over the phone. She goes, it sounds like you're having a panic attack. And I was like, I have no history of anxiety. I've never in my life had a panic attack. That can't be it. And she said, well, if you think you passed out, you need to come in and be evaluated.
You're one of the most put together people I know.
Yeah.
I think I would have a panic attack if I
Yes.
saw you
You
like
saw me
that.
acting like that?
That would put me over
I mean,
the edge.
I was almost inconsolable.
Wow.
Just hysterical.
So you guys start making your way to the
Down a
hospital.
flight of stairs. Could you imagine walking in a eclamptic down a rickety flight of stairs?
No.
Oh.
Well, So we got in the car and we were driving, and I don't remember what we talked about.
And we were
but you
supposed to go
fairly
camping
lucid.
that day.
We were. Oh, that. Yeah,
We
no,
were.
that's one of the weird parts. So I got back, and for the first 10 minutes of this whole thing, when I'm sitting there trying to console her, I'm thinking, how long is this going to take before we can put the bags in the car? Like, we're supposed to be at Camp Bob in 3 hours.
we're
Like,
going
where-
camping.
well, thank heaven that didn't happen, because on the way to the hospital, I think we were at a red light pretty close to the hospital, and she just said, it's starting again.
Oh my.
Yeah, I
And
said it's going to happen again.
Yeah, it's going to happen again. And then her arm just starts doing this thing where it comes up, twisting
Just
around,
contorting.
and her face went gray. And that's when I put it together. She had a seizure. That's what happened.
Yeah.
I got home right after she had
Right
a
in
seizure,
front of
and
you,
here's another
having
one.
a seizure.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
You're
this
on the way to the hospital.
you
You're
know
not
no
there
thing.
yet.
No. No.
We were 5 minutes from the doors of the
If
emergency
that.
room. Thank
Yeah.
heaven.
So you just kept on going.
Yeah, well, sort of. We were at a red light, and I mean, at this point, it is rush hour traffic, so I'm not exactly moving unless I drive up over a hedge and probably get us stuck.
Yeah.
So I'm the sort of person that can generally be okay with whatever's happening as long as there's something I can do. As long as you give me a way to put one foot in front of the other, I'm going to be all right. And in that moment, there was nothing I could
Nothing
do.
to
I
do.
just had to sit there and watch my wife have a seizure. Except I did know
You did
enough.
turn me on my side.
I
make
did
sure
know enough to
wasn't
turn you on your side and do a tongue sweep.
Wow.
I knew that much. And then I called 911. Or no, then I called Brittany and told her what was happening because I needed somebody to give me something to do, please.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
just said call 911, and that was obviously pointless because we were already
We were
practically at the
so
hospital.
close
But
to
I
the
mean,
emergency room.
again, I just needed to have something I could actually do to
Yeah.
keep myself focused. And we got her to the emergency room doors, and it was kind of a repeat of the scene in the
Yeah.
bedroom at that point because you were just coming back out of it.
But I actually, so after the second seizure, I probably have a solid 4 to 6 hours where I remember not a thing. I could not tell you what that ER looks like.
And that's amazing to me because when we got you in there and they did their initial intake assessment or whatever, and they took you back for, I think, a CAT scan or something. And
They
as
were
soon as
scanning
you
to
got,
make sure I didn't have a concussion
brain
or a
bleed.
head injury or a stroke.
they said a brain bleed was what they were
Yeah,
looking
brain
for.
bleed.
But
Wow.
yeah, so they got you back in there, and by the time they had you there, you had calmed down, and you had all of your medical knowledge at immediate recall, and you were grilling the medical staff over what's my blood pressure, what's my this, what's my that.
My.
What med are you giving
So
me?
it-
But I
yeah.
don't remember that
But
at
it
all.
blows me away that you couldn't remember any of that because you were practically on
But
the
now
job.
the story keeps going because
Yeah.
everyone figures out that you're very sick.
I mean, one sick lady.
You've got eclampsia.
Yes.
That wasn't in your birth plan.
No.
Um,
No, it was not.
And then so how did your labor and birth go?
Yeah, so I think I received just absolutely excellent care from maternal fetal medicine physicians. They did such a great job. I mean, you and I have talked about this. A lot of physicians would have took one look at me and said, 2 seizures, we're doing a C-section.
Yeah, before the hour was up. Yeah.
Right, get the baby out, get the placenta out. That's how you make it go away is you deliver the baby.
Yeah.
But my blood pressures actually it only took 1 dose of blood pressure medicine and a lot of magnesium through an IV.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any elevated blood pressures after that. And so they felt that it was reasonable to induce my labor,
Yeah.
which I was very grateful for because as a first-time mom, those inductions can be long. It's not
You
like you're
expect
going
it
to
to
have a
be.
baby in 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
So they got me settled. I did choose to get an epidural right away, which was radically different
From your birth plan.
Right, my water birth with a midwife. But the reasoning behind that was, okay, well, this is a situation. I'm at high risk for needing a C-section, and I do not want to be under general anesthesia. I want to be awake. The most important thing that I want is to be awake for the birth. And my best bet for that is with an epidural. And also, I can't get out of bed, right? I'm on magnesium.
Right.
I'm just so post-ictal, right? So post-seizure, I'm disoriented. I hardly know what's going on. Why not have an epidural?
Yeah.
At that point, it just made the most sense. And so you just adapt and you say, this is what makes sense for me to achieve what's most important.
Yeah.
And then a thunderstorm set in, actually, just to add to the.
Well, it was, right. So they got you in
atmosphere.
there, they got you induced, and then we were kind of settling in and getting ready to sleep as much as we could for the evening.
Right.
And this big thunderstorm rolls in. It's like end Act 1.
End
curtain
Act 1,
closes,
yes.
You know.
So how long?
Drama.
How long did it take you to deliver your daughter?
I delivered at 3 p.m. the next day.
Oh, so it's still a long.
So what? 18 hours, I suppose, as they did. Side attack to get the cervix ready overnight.
Yeah.
They might have done a Foley balloon catheter at one point, Pitocin, the usual.
But hats off to to your point earlier. Hats off to your physicians that
Yes.
took a deep breath and said maybe we could avoid a C-section in a first-time mom.
Right, exactly.
Whereas before, in many places, it would have been reflexive.
It would have, right. The fear would have set in, and they would have said, well, let's just do a C-section.
Yeah.
But like I said, they were just so excellent in caring for me. And I had just an absolutely fantastic nurse, too.
And so you press on till the next day and then deliver your daughter.
Yeah, we had a doula with us, which I was still very grateful for the doula. And I think for your support, too, right? Between Brittany and the doula, they were really the only ones talking to you. In our conversations, that was one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, that was a hard part for me. Again, because here I don't have much that I can actually do, and I have no idea what most of the words being said actually mean.
Right.
I probably knew more than most guys because I was married to her.
Yeah.
But I hadn't. She wasn't even technically a midwife at that point, so
No.
I hadn't learned a whole lot yet.
Yeah.
So who's explaining to me what on earth is happening? And I think the biggest thing I wanted to know was how worried am I supposed to be right now?
Yeah.
Because I kind of get what's going on, but what are the risks?
Yeah.
And nobody was talking to me about that, except fortunately Brittany did show up at some point, and she was there to kind of talk, just talk to me about what was going on and help me help me have an idea of how worried I should be, I guess.
I always try to remember that, especially for we men types, that in the absence of information, we can start to feel helpless. And generally speaking, we don't do well with helpless.
No.
Right, yeah.
We can start inventing things if we
Sure.
if we don't have something.
Yeah.
So that must have been awful. But the thing I'm hearing you say so loudly is, I mean, you went from really one extreme almost
Yes.
to the opposite
Yes.
extreme. I mean, by grace, you didn't have a C-section, but from really thinking about a home birth to having to choose to get an epidural and magnesium sulfate and Pitocin and all those interventions that you would have never put in your birth plan.
Right.
They ended up being necessary.
Oh, absolutely.
But you can still say something positive about your birth.
Yes,
It didn't destroy your whole birth.
No, it did not. And as I look back on my birth, I felt safe, right? So I felt like the care that I was getting was necessary, was appropriate, and it was just really good. It was really good medical care. So I felt safe with the people taking care of me. Evelyn went to the NICU that I worked in. My favorite nurse practitioner was on that night. I literally knew personally the people taking care of her, so I felt she was safe. And that reduces trauma, right?
Yeah.
I felt supported, and my husband and my doula and my friend and my mother, who I was having my baby the day of my baby shower. And so my mom, and as any mother would, was getting everything ready. I hadn't set up a crib. I had nothing. I didn't have a car seat, nothing.
Sure.
So she was managing all of that. So I felt supported, and I was so incredibly loved. I felt that the people caring for me really cared about me. Obviously, Collin really cared about me.
Yeah.
And all of that reduces trauma, and you can have a birth that, just completely changes and is so complicated and still walk out with a really beautiful experience.
And that really is, I think, our message as we go through all of your labors and births.
Yes.
is, so many times you and I see patients and maybe they need to be induced and they think, well, then my birth plan's done.
Right.
It's
but
all
it's
over.
not. No. My birth with Evelyn, it changed me more as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, and empowered me more than my other two births that were very straightforward in
why
their own way.
Why do you think that is?
I think that's because to be on the receiving end of such love is so life-changing.
Oh.
I'm an incredibly independent person, as you have seen, and that was the first time that I really had to lean on other people. And, I said, that vulnerability set in of, wow, I'm sick. I felt betrayed by my body. So my body, is not doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, I was a state champion gymnast in high school. My body has always done exactly what it should do with a high degree of precision. And here it was seizing. Like, for why? What reason? And so I felt betrayed and vulnerable. But to be so loved in that moment was incredibly life-changing for me.
Do you think that's why you walked away from that feeling empowered, whereas
Yes.
Other women might have the same experience
Mm-hmm.
and really walk away with a lot of trauma
Yeah.
and a lot of injury?
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure all of those people that were loving you and caring for you, they
Yeah.
didn't think they were doing trauma prevention.
No, but they were.
They were just doing what comes natural.
Yes. So I would say, maybe a little bit of trauma. I think I struggled in my second pregnancy with those events. And it took some processing and unraveling. But by far, I feel positive about her birth. And I actually, after her birth, I wrote a whole page of one of the things I did to process was list, all the things I was grateful for, because really there was just so much to be grateful for. Thank God I didn't seize in a tub. Thank God I didn't seize 2 hours away on a camping trip. Thank God that I had Collin, that Collin came home early, that I had my mother, that I had a vaginal birth and good care with MFM. I mean, the list just went on and on and on and on. And it was really helpful to write that out and just to see how much there was to be so grateful for.
Not the least of which, as I recall, is that we got to receive the Eucharist in the hospital
We did.
room.
Actually, we
Maybe
did.
an hour
right.
before she was born or something.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was born at the hour of mercy at 3 p.m.
Wow.
How beautiful is
Add
that?
that to the list.
Add that to the list. I also, this is a trivial thing, but, so I hadn't had anything to eat or drink in a very long time. And I was insistent in my drugged up state. I just was high 6
Popsicle.
ways. And I just said, I have to have a popsicle. And the resident said no. And I said, okay, send in the attending. And they send in the attending. And I said, I have to have a popsicle. I don't care what note you're going to write, but you're going to write that note, and I'm having a popsicle. And he said, okay. And he did. I requested my medical records, because it's a very odd thing to have something happen to you that you can't remember.
Sure.
It's just this bizarre feeling. And as I'm, at some point I eventually read through them, and there sure enough was a note about
The popsicle.
the popsicle.
Yeah.
I got his own note.
Few
you know-
things I've ever done for you made you as happy as that
Yeah.
popsicle.
Popsicle.
I'm telling you.
Would that all problems be solved? That
Right, with an orange popsicle.
back up
so
a little.
good.
So you talked about, you used the word processing.
Yes.
Did someone sort of counsel you to say, you had a major thing, you really ought to be intentional and process that? Or how did you come to that?
So much. I think I just knew that we needed to. I will say, so do you remember we were on postpartum?
That
And
doctor. Yeah.
we had one of the maternal fetal medicine specialists came into our room, and he looked at me, and he just was so human. And this has affected how I treat my patients now. But he looked at me and he said, has anybody sat down with you and gone through the events of what happened and really explained it? Now that you're postpartum, now that you're not drugged up, now that you're remembering things again.
Sure.
And I said, no, actually. And he sat down on the ground, like on the dirty floor of a hospital room. He sat down and took as much time as we needed to go through things.
Wow.
From a group of doctors that historically are in and out very quickly. They're busy,
Sure.
they're in high demand. But this doctor sat down on the
was a
hospital
gift.
floor.
Yeah.
It was such a gift,
But
right?
I think-
What a blessing that
I think
was.
something for listeners to hear there is here in that description is this idea that even what could seemingly be not quite such an exciting, labor and birth story as yours, that you need to be intentional and maybe set
Yes.
aside and do a little fact checking. That's why it would be nice to have the medical record, because your
Right.
memory can be off and
Right.
your spouse's memory can be off, and
Sure.
things that are little can turn into huge things in your mind
Yes.
because you didn't get a chance to write it exactly or correct it, I should say.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
great that you had the chance to do
Yes.
that. Everyone
was
should
so
take
helpful.
advantage of that, if they have
It
the
was.
chance.
Yeah, I mean, just writing out my birth story of what happened to me was
Yeah.
therapeutic.
Wow.
Just to write it down, and this is what happened, and this is what I remember, and this is what I don't. And I mean, I can barely remember Evelyn being born. I have some vague, foggy memory of her being on my chest, but I really remember so little of the actual details. And that plays into to my son James' birth, because I remember everything with such clarity. It's just such a night and day difference.
Well, so you survive
I did.
Evelyn's birth, and you get out of the hospital eventually, and your blood pressure goes back to normal.
It does. We get out of the NICU, all of that.
Life goes on.
Yeah, life goes on.
And it was so fun. At some point, you decided we should really do this.
Yeah,
again.
mere 16 months later.
Good. We like this. Good.
Yeah.
So what was starting another pregnancy like? You referenced it a little bit. Just less than 2 years after going through this potentially really traumatic event.
So we were pregnant, six or 7 months postpartum, I suppose?
She was born at the end of April, and we conceived him in December.
Wow.
It's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah,
What were we
absolutely.
thinking?
I don't think we should say that on air. It wasn't planned to say that.
It was by someone.
It was maybe like a calculated risk, because whoever gets pregnant the first time that they ovulate,
right, never happens
after
except
having
when it
a
does,
baby,
of course. Yeah.
right? Except when it does. So I think when I was pregnant for the second time, that's when I really had to encounter some of the harder feelings about my birth with Evelyn. Because after the birth, and the way that many minimizers do, I was like, I got through it, I survived, I'm fine, life is good, move on. But now I'm pregnant again, and now I'm feeling really vulnerable again. Of what if this happens again? Like I know what seizures can do to the body. I've cared for women with seizures that have had strokes due to pregnancy, and so I was scared. I was very scared.
A patient that I had years ago that always stays in my memory will say that she got really severe PTSD after a medical trauma because she said, I thought I was fine, and it turns out I wasn't.
Yeah.
So sitting here talking to you, I think I'm fine, but maybe I'm not. How do I know? I didn't know then. How do I ever know I'm fine? And I think we hear that with people that sort of on page 2, this is what happens.
Right. You could tell me all day long the statistic for recurrent eclamptic seizure.
Didn't help.
But to me, it's 100% because it happened to me.
Wow.
And that's how it felt. And I was very scared. In fact, I actually couldn't, in the second and third trimester, I couldn't fall asleep without checking my blood pressure, and not with an automatic cuff. It had to be a manual cuff, stethoscope in my ears. I had to hear my blood pressure to fall asleep, because he was on second shift, so I was home alone.
Oh, wow.
Every time I fell asleep, I was home alone.
Wow.
And I was scary. But then actually, do you remember this? So I had, how many weeks was I when I had a dream? Maybe I was 34 weeks pregnant or so. And I had a dream that we were at the hospital. I'd had a baby boy. All had gone well. And I remember thinking, I said, Collin, thank you so much for taking such good care of me again. And I was so grateful to him for whatever he had done. And we named that baby, in the dream, we named the baby Joseph. And I woke up out of that dream with just a supernatural peace.
Wow.
And after that night, I stopped checking my blood pressure. I didn't need to do it anymore.
Wow.
And I just had this really strong sense that St. Joseph was watching over us and was praying for us. We, in our marriage, have a strong devotion to St. Joseph. And that was just such a beautiful spiritual moment for me. And it really set my fears at ease. And then as you get into the story, it becomes a little bit ironic.
Well, carry on.
I'll do the first bit, I suppose. So I had a different job at this point, and like she said, I was working second shift, and this was the night, it was in September, it was the night before the biggest day of work of the year, and I get home at about midnight. And my coworkers knew she was pregnant, of course, and they'd been joking around with me. Watch, you're going to get home, you're going to crack that first beer open, it's going to be time to head to the hospital. So I got home, and she was already in bed asleep, and I kissed her on the forehead and went downstairs, and I got out my Oktoberfest and my book, and I crack it open, and I pause. Okay, I'm good. All right. And I sit there and I drink my beer and I read my book and I go up to get into bed and I get under the covers, and that's when it all kicks off.
Oh my.
Yeah.
You had woken up because you were having contractions. And the other thing I want to put in here first is that at 6 p.m. and really every day leading up to this for about a week, you had been doing the same thing that you did at about 6 p.m. the same day, which is call me at work and complain how this baby is never going to come out.
Have a baby.
It's going to be pregnant forever.
I was sure that I'm the same as the rest of you all, right? I feel every bit as pregnant and just as sure that the baby's never coming out.
Mm-hmm.
On the phone crying, I'm never going to have a baby. My, 4-foot tall Jewish grandmother, she said, well, Rachel, just mop the floor on your hands and knees and you'll have a baby. And I mopped the floor on my hands and knees and was very much so pregnant. Well, I mean, I had the baby that night.
I was going to say, not for long you weren't.
Not for long.
Yeah. So you had I remember that you woke up right about when I got into bed at roughly midnight because you were having contractions. Mm-hmm. And you can pick it up from there. Well,
so I slept for the first hour. I said, well, I did this last night. I contracted off and on, and then I woke up and I was still pregnant. So this is nothing. I'm going to go back to sleep. And I did. I did that for about an hour. And then they were uncomfortable enough that I got up and got out of bed and got in the shower, and we labored in the shower. And Colin's timing him, and he's like, so when are we supposed to call again? Because these are,
minute and a half.
Like getting kind of close. And we called the midwife, and she said, well, your first baby was preterm, you were induced, you might labor more like a first-time mom. It sounds like you're getting active. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to labor at home as long as possible. She said, great, keep laboring and call me back in an hour. So at that point, I'd had 2 hours of contractions, so we're at the 2-hour mark, and I get out of the shower. And I think I demanded to be fed. I was hungry.
You went back to bed and tried to go back to sleep, and that wasn't working. It was getting more intense. So you flipped onto your hands and knees for one of them, and in the middle of the contraction, you just managed to bark out the word grapes. Grapes!
Grapes!
So I got her a bowl of grapes.
Best bowl of grapes of my life. It was so good.
She finishes the bowl of grapes, and the contraction is over, and flips back over and looks at me. How many minutes has it been? I don't think I have many minutes left.
Oh, my.
Okay, why don't we get you into some clothes and we'll get to the hospital. So we
This was maybe 10 minutes after we called the midwife.
Start trying to get her dressed, and goes into another contraction. And, I'm sent back for this piece of clothing and bring that. And now she's too hot, so I go back for a different piece of clothing. And, well, now that's wrong. Go get the first one again. And,
yes.
And so, I finally...
You shake your head because I think you've been in a similar position.
I was within one more change of instructions of putting you in a garbage bag and just hauling you out the front door at that point. Like, we need to go. But I think I finally got you mostly dressed, and you decided to go to the bathroom.
Well, it was a 30-minute drive. So
right. So you decided to go to the bathroom.
I did not want to go to the bathroom. You need to pee on the way.
Makes perfect sense, only we never made it back out of the bathroom.
No, we did not. He dropped like a bowling ball through my pelvis.
I went back for that last change of clothes.
He slammed down.
I went back for that last change of clothes, and she yelled from the bathroom, call 911.
Was that change of clothes.
It was, clearly.
Yeah. It was the warm shower. As we learned later, warm showers are something to be careful
Maybe we
of.
should say to husbands in sort of a blanket way, if in fact you find your wife contracting in the hands and knees position, it's time to move. Grapes or no grapes.
Right.
It's time to get going.
There's a certain change in the tenor of her voice. Like she'll moan or complain a little bit when they start, but there's a certain change in the tenor of the voice where it starts to get a lot lower. The first time you hear that, it's time to go.
It was time to go 15 minutes ago.
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
So James is born in the toilets or restroom. We should
on my
say.
hands and knees in the bathroom. Yes. Yes.
Quickly, very quickly.
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yes.
But no seizures.
You actually tease me because you say that you caught a baby before I did.
I did, actually.
I was in midwifery school at that point.
And
we had just covered delivery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born right into your hands.
He was, yep.
That's amazing.
Well, Evelyn was sleeping.
Evelyn, and that still amazes me. Evelyn, one door down from this, slept through the whole thing.
So you had called 911, right? So you were on the phone with 911. Because I said, call 911, like, we're not making it.
Get some paramedics.
We need somebody here in case something bad happens. And the guy on the phone, he couldn't hear you. Over me.
Oh, well, I'm trying to explain the situation, and he says, I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you with all that hollering in the background. Somewhere in the back of it, if you can hear the hollering, like, you got my address. Send an ambulance where there's the hollering. Like, come on. So, but they did eventually dispatch an ambulance, and he was supposed to stay on the phone with me.
Not one, 2 ambulances and a fire truck. Too much drama.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Too much.
Now every husband listening is trying to figure out what you were thinking as your son is being born. What was going through your mind then?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm the kind of guy who, as long as I have something I can do, I can handle pretty much everything. And it helps to have, this might sound funny, I don't know, but it helped to have a military background, because you get into a certain mental space of just, it's mission time. Like, ignore the chaos, ignore what's going on around you that might disturb you, and just do what has to be done. And it was pretty easy to just kind of slide into that. And it really helped also that, again, she was a midwifery student. She was generally highly competent and put together. So it was really easy to just put some trust in her. She was lucid. She could talk to me, tell me what she needed. And I'm just going to go do what has to be done, and I'll clean my hands later. So,
I think the dirty secret is that maybe catching the baby is one of the easier parts of our job.
Yeah.
Because usually the baby just comes out.
Yeah, I think most people would think just the opposite.
Right.
That there's something magical that we do.
The baby just comes out. Women's bodies are made to give birth, and babies just come out.
It is designed to work, which is beautiful. But certainly you're...
So you did a hands and knees birth in our bathroom, in our tiny little bathroom.
Wow.
Hands and knees birth. So if any physician ever tells you, or midwife says, I can't catch your baby in that position...
Wrong.
Nonsense.
And I'm sure if
Just
we
nonsense.
could find your birth plan for this pregnancy, it didn't say my husband doing my birth in the bathroom.
In the bathroom at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
No, that was not the birth plan.
So you must have had a sense of, I can't believe this has happened to me.
Yeah.
Help us understand what that was like. Was that traumatic to you?
No. I mean, compared to Evelyn's birth, James' birth was like a candy bowl of memories in my brain. I could remember everything. I wasn't drugged up.
Yeah.
The hormone high was unreal. It was just amazing, to actually have your hormones working as they should and to feel that surge in oxytocin. And
you had the biggest smile on
I had the
your face
biggest
that I've
smile
ever
on my
seen
face. It was just delightful. I mean, it really was compared to how I felt
I'll
during
never
Evelyn's
forget.
birth.
So we had called the paramedics, and the dispatcher stayed on the phone with us
I
while
was
this
going to
was
ask
going
if they
on.
showed up, what happened.
They did. So after the dispatcher said something about get a shoelace and tie off the umbilical, and you
I was
pulled one of
arguing
these,
with
don't
him
do
on
it.
the phone. I said, that's disgusting. I'm not doing that. And
Yeah.
he said, ma'am, you don't
don't
understand.
understand.
And I said, sir, you don't understand.
So eventually I
Anyways.
just told him I did it. I didn't really, but I just
No.
told him I did it so that we could move on.
Yeah.
And the paramedics get there, and there's like 8 of them.
Yes.
It must have been a slow night, or maybe they just needed to train the new guys on birth, because 8 of these guys come thundering up the stairs into our bedroom, and 2 of them standing in the doorway, everybody like awkwardly trying not to look but also look, and one of them was standing in the doorway, says, "Ma'am, I think I can see the placenta in there if you want to push that out the rest of the way." And so I'm getting blankets from Evelyn's room, and we're getting everything together to get in the ambulance and go.
My
And
mom
then,
was there at that
well, no,
point.
she wasn't yet. That's the thing, because as this is happening, it finally occurs to me, oh crap, her mom is about to be here any minute. She's going to, because your mom didn't know this had happened. We had called her.
We had
called her to say, hey, we
She
got
was
to go to
gonna
the
watch
hospital. Can you watch Evelyn? She didn't know any of that went down. And I'm thinking, she's about to show up on the street, and there's 2 ambulances and a fire truck and like eight paramedics
Maybe
out
tough to
there.
explain.
I had better call her right now. So I call her, and she picks up the phone. Don't worry, I'm about to turn onto your street. Oh my God, what are these all for you? No, it's okay. It's okay. But comes right up the stairs, cuts right through this.
Cuts through him like butter. Just cuts through this.
Stands in the door with her hand on her hip.
Yes.
Rachel, what are you doing?
What are you doing? She was scolding me. I told you not to do this because rapid birth, it actually runs in my family. She says, I told you not to do this.
A scornful mother.
Yes.
Wow.
And you as perky as I've ever seen you. I just had a baby, Mom.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So
just
you
so
dismissed
happy.
them eventually, and now you're a seizure-less postpartum mom, and you think, so much for birth plans.
So much for birth plans, indeed.
So the next thing, I told her that night, the only thing now that you can do to surprise me is have a totally normal birth.
I haven't accomplished that.
And I still haven't gotten it yet.
So a little bit of time goes by. You moved to Fort
A little
Wayne.
bit more time.
Yeah, a little bit more time this time. You moved to Fort Wayne, a
did.
decision for which we're all very happy.
Yes.
And you're blessed with another pregnancy.
With baby number 3.
Yeah. So what was going through your mind at this point? I mean, you've gone,
Oh,
you haven't
goodness.
even come close to a desired birth plan
No,
yet.
no, and I had diabetes with James. I had diabetes with my 3rd, had pelvic pain with the third. I mean, I just couldn't seem to get an uncomplicated pregnancy.
Yeah.
So maybe I've given up on that dream a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But
Did you feel kind of fatalistic during the third pregnancy, or did you think, no, I'm going to get this one the way I want it?
well, I went into it that way, and then at 16 weeks, the pelvic pain sets in. I mean, just horrific pelvic pain. And I thought, I don't even have a belly yet. How could I be in so much pain? And had to start navigating that. And then thought, I am going to eat right out of the gate. I'm going to exercise out of the gate. And I'm not going to have diabetes this time. And I failed the 1 hour test. I didn't even bother with the 3 hour. I just started checking my blood sugars. And sure enough, I mean, it was there. So, but you just have to be resilient to that, right? You have to be adaptive to that. And there's healing to be had. The pelvic pain actually, with really good care, got better, not worse, despite however big my belly got. And so I find that there's hope, right? There's hope for healing. And that's a really beautiful takeaway that I can share with other women.
It's funny. I mean, I often hear pregnant women in a situation just like you're describing, and they'll say something along the lines of, this is horrible. It couldn't get any worse.
It could get way worse.
Right. and I think you actually believe that in the moment when you say that.
Yes,
and all of the reality dosing in the world
to
try to prove to you that it could get a lot worse doesn't seem to help.
Right.
But why did you feel so hopeful, I wonder?
Because I was being cared for by people that felt hopeful. I walked into my chiropractor's office, and she said, I got you. We're going to work on this. You're not going to be in this much pain for your whole pregnancy. Like, we're going to figure this out.
Wow.
I walk into Nicole Bobe's office, and she's praying with me, and she says, we're going to help you feel better.
Maybe if we were writing the story of your births, being surrounded by good people would be a big part of it.
Oh, that is the most important. I mean, the team of people that you choose to care for you is the single-handed most important decision you will make.
And probably for reasons that most couples don't think of, right? They wouldn't be thinking of all the things that happened to you.
Right.
They would be thinking probably of more superficial things.
Sure.
But wow, it really made a difference for you.
It did. It absolutely
So you
did.
enter this pregnancy, you got some bumpy starts.
Yep.
Things are moving along.
Yeah.
Pick up the story.
So we get to 35. Was I 35
Which
weeks?
is kind of a
I think
troubling
35
time for
weeks.
you,
That's
right?
a troubling time for me. And no, not 35 weeks. With Irene, it was we were 38 weeks. Had a growth ultrasound, and she was growth restricted. And with good reason. We had plenty of risk factors.
So listeners, that means the
data.
baby is smaller than it ought to be.
Right. It's not meeting growth potential. And so we said, okay, well, it's time to have a baby. And, so we were planning a birth center birth, planning a water birth, planning the things. I planned it each time. And now we need to have a baby. So we had scheduled an induction, I think maybe 24 hours later. And you said to me as I'm walking out the door, okay, now go put yourself in labor. Because if I'm in labor, then I can go to the birth center, right? I mean, it's not that you can't have a small baby there. It's usually that the fact that you need to have a baby requires interventions that are obtained at the hospital.
Now, pause for a second. So that very discussion where we say to patients, your pregnancy needs to end. There's something afoot here. There's some process in play. And as a result of that, it's safer for your baby to be outside of you than inside of you. You and I know a lot of times that causes some disharmony in families, and people really struggle to kind of accept that information. Maybe I don't think you're right. Does the baby really need to come out? Wouldn't it be better to just let things happen naturally? How did you cope with that? Do you remember any kind of push-pull feelings there?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think I went to the bathroom and shed a few tears. I was frustrated and disappointment, and the why me questions enter into your head of why can't I seem to achieve a pregnancy? I take better care of myself than almost anybody I know.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we have really solid information that this baby needs to come out. And I don't want to wait. To me, it wasn't worth the risk of waiting to see what happened next, because I know what can happen next. And I agreed that she needed to
Sounds like
come
you
out.
sort of focused on the objective truths.
Yeah.
And then let your emotions be what they were, but focused on the...
Right, and those are very human and messy and complicated, but
you powered through.
But you power through it, and again, I had good support, right? I have my mother, I have my husband, I've got my family. I had a friend planning to come, and And so when you're again surrounded by support, you can adapt, you can be flexible, you can change. And I know from experience that the circumstances don't dictate how I feel walking away from my birth or what I think about my birth. I mean, you could have any circumstance under the sun, and you and I see this in patients.
Sure.
They can go through really hard things and still walk away with love and gratitude and a heart that has a deeper capacity for loving other people. And so I just trust in that potential, and I know that the circumstances don't have to dictate what I think about my birth.
Oh, that's really beautiful. So you're hoping labor will start.
Yes. So we encourage labor.
We did.
We encouraged labor. We did a membrane sweep. I saw my wonderful chiropractor. She did a great adjustment.
Because you're thinking, I'm under the gun. I've got to get in
I've
labor.
got like T-minus 12 hours. Yeah, we got to go.
Yeah. So some of those things were successful.
They were, yeah. They were. So we tried some things that night. I had maybe a few painful contractions, and then I went to bed at 3 a.m. And everybody, and especially Marianne has preached to me, if you even think you're in labor, you're coming to the birth center. Okay, so I wake up and I have a painful contraction, so I start the timer, and I have a second painful contraction. I say, okay, if I have a third, I'm going to call, I think Becca was on call that night, I'm going to call the midwife and we'll go in. And I fall asleep. And waiting for the third contraction. And then I wake up doing absolutely nothing. I mean, just not a thing.
Now, Collin, are you aware this is happening, or is this secret?
Yes, but as she said, she's a minimizer. So she swore flatly up into the fall, that morning of, that she was not really in labor.
Sure.
No, it's
and by now you'd think I'd know better, but I took her at her word.
Yeah.
So
you think that I knew better?
I thought, I guess I thought you did. Plus, I knew
but I truly woke up doing nothing.
I was put into a false sense of security in my defense by the fact that I knew we were going in for an induction anyways. So whatever.
Right. We were going to continue our labor encouragement for the birth center at approximately 9 a.m. And it was, 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So we did one more at home. If we can be frank, I mean, we had sex one more time to try to encourage
sometimes
labor.
that works.
Sometimes that works.
Yeah, let's be honest.
I really wasn't expecting it to, but I thought, well, all right, it's going to be the last time for a little while, so I guess here we go. And then he decides to go to the grocery store.
Well, you're okay. Don't just put it out there and not explain. Her mother was coming from out of town to watch the other two, and we didn't have any food in the house.
We didn't have food in the house.
And
he was going to go to the grocery store.
So I went to the grocery store.
And he left me in bed watching a Christmas movie, eating breakfast. That was how he left me.
And I came back, and the two kids ran into the house ahead of me while I was getting the grocery bags, and James came pelting back out,
so he's
bellowing at me.
4 now.
Yeah, he's 4 and talking quite a bit. He's got quite a voice on him, and he's bellowing at me, "Dad, Mom needs you right now." Oh boy, here we go. Come in, and you know how I mentioned a little while ago about that shift in tone.
The shift in tone.
Well, that had happened while I was gone.
Oh my.
So immediately, all right, let's get you in the car.
Yeah, but you were going to go feed the pigs.
Because, again...
You were going to go down the hill and feed our pigs.
Again, you've got to put it in context so I don't look like a complete arse. we raise pigs on our property, and I had been testing keeping them in an electric fence at this point. And I knew from experience that the way to keep them from getting out was not to have a good fence, but to make sure that they were fed on time. And I thought, well, what could disrupt the birth process more
Runaway pigs.
than getting a call from the neighbors saying that my pigs are all over the neighborhood destroying people's gardens? So let's make sure that doesn't happen, because she was still swearing that we had time. So, all right, this will take me 10 minutes.
40 minutes of
Something like
contractions?
that.
Maybe 40 minutes.
I think every husband listening would side with you on that.
Right.
Yes.
I mean,
it's very logical.
practicality.
I very colorfully told him that was not what he was going. You are not. No.
Call the...
No.
I'm going to censor.
So
Call the neighbors.
Call
Leave
the
the other word
neighbors.
out.
Tell
Call the
them
neighbors.
to feed the pigs.
And when she did that, it was like, okay, I guess we're just going to have to
Yes.
accept that the pigs are going to do what they're going to do, and you're going to do what you're going to do.
So the kids go in the car. They get buckled back up. I get in the car. It's December 8th. It's cold. Was there snow on the ground? There's snow on the ground.
Was coming down.
And I'm, getting out to the car. Colin's, shortly behind me. And I thought, oh, shoot, I don't even know, am I going to make it to the car? So I climb in the driver's seat and have just a rip-roaring contraction. The baby descends. I've got the slight urge to push. I hollered apparently because James starts bellowing for Collin again. Dad!
Just coming out the front door, and I heard him from inside the car, Dad, like panicking.
Oh my!
And so bolted into the car, threw that thing into reverse.
I climb across the seat into the passenger seat.
Tore off down the driveway.
Pants come off.
And by the time I turned left onto our street, pants were off. And so the part of our street that we live on, there's an almost 90-degree curve right at the end of it.
Yeah.
And she took one look at that and thought,
I'm not making it.
The curve.
Yeah.
I'm not making
it around that curve.
And I had a whole kit, by the way. Like I was prepared for. I did the best car birth.
Which
the best car
we
birth.
should talk about that in terms of birth plans because we'll get to that. But I'm not making it past that curve. Collin, pull the car over right here, and
you're like, here we go again.
I thought, here we go again. We failed again. How did we manage? At least we made it into the car this time.
We
but
did. It's progress.
Made it all of 50
You would
feet
think
down
the
our
midwife
street.
would know when she's in labor, but she does not.
Oh my!
And
No.
so there
Not
you
in the
went.
bathroom at
No.
least.
Went and popped Irene out in the passenger seat of our Odyssey. And the funny thing too is that right after she slid out, another car came up the other way, and it was one of our neighbors who just so happened to have been an L&D nurse at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So she pulled over and piled all of these blankets into our car for us.
It was quite a shock for her coming around the bend in the road. I mean, I think she came around like as I was pulling Irene up onto my chest.
Oh, what timing!
Yeah.
Wow. And so you have another exciting birth.
Yeah, we leave 911 out of this. That turns out it just was not worth it, really.
Right.
And so we just kept driving. I called Marianne. I said I had the baby. She said, I told you not to do that. I'm like, you're the second woman to tell me not to do that.
Sure. Wow.
So next time we're renting a Winnebago and living in the parking lot.
That's what
of
they
the
say.
birth center.
That seems reasonable.
That's what they say.
So, as we get to the end of this chapter of the story,
Yes.
something tells me there's many more chapters.
I think so.
But as you get to the end of this chapter, what are the takeaway lessons about birth planning and about things changing?
I would say make a birth plan so you know what you do want.
Sure.
And then be adaptable.
So the plan's got to have flexibility.
It's got to have flexibility.
Yeah.
I think where women and families run into trouble is when they're so stuck on this one plan that they've not thought about the other possibilities.
Yeah.
And there's so much fear of change that fear is what creates trouble. But when you're adaptable, when you have an open heart, and when you've chosen providers that make you feel safe, a birth team that leaves you feeling supported, you're going to walk away having been so well loved that no matter what happens, my hope would be that there would still be this really beautiful birth story to tell, despite the changes and whatever else has happened.
Well, I know that both of you are people of strong faith, and as you think about that, how do you think your faith has affected this journey to parenthood, and how has this journey to parenthood affected your faith?
I think that kind of touches on what if you'd asked me what my advice was for planning, what I would have said was don't focus on specifics, focus on principles. And that's I get that idea because of I think my having been raised in the faith. It's have your first principles in order. And that really changes the way that you see everything that happens to you. And we were,
Absolutely.
like we said with Evelyn's birth story at the beginning, I too, I came out of that. That could have easily been a horrible memory. I will never, as long as I live, get the image of her having that second seizure out of my head. I'll never be able to scrub that from my memory. And yet somehow that whole story is actually an overwhelmingly positive memory for me. And a big part of that is because I'm able to place that in a context of faith. It completely
absolutely.
changes the way that you see everything, and it
It
allows
does.
you to find the things to be grateful for rather than to
And
focus on what
we
you
don't
didn't
have
get.
to fear suffering. As Catholics, as Christians, we don't have to fear suffering.
There's value.
Right, because Christ redeems everything. And while he might not intend for our suffering, he sure can redeem it if we open our hearts to that possibility.
And there was great value in going into that suffering together. For me especially, having not been the one that personally went through it, the opportunity to go into that suffering with her You used
Yeah.
the phrase something about expanding your heart early. I think that's really
Yes.
well put. That is exactly what that does.
It taught me how to love other people.
Yeah. And for me, being able to enter that suffering with you and walk through it with you did that for me.
Yes. Yeah, and we learned how to love each other better. Right? And how beautiful is
can,
that,
yeah.
right? How empowering is that?
I don't think about it very often, but every once in a while it does occur to me that our relationship now would probably be very different if our first birth experience hadn't been what it was.
Sure.
Wow.
Sure, right. It really, I think it strengthened us as a couple, and it strengthened our faith.
Wow.
Right? So come to find out,
was,
it's not the water birth that makes you an empowered woman.
Right. and to, kind of bringing it back around to the main question, it is because of the faith that was a strengthening experience. You have to be able to see these things in their proper context and have your
Right.
first principles laid out, and that's
And how beautiful in James' story, which I'm still a little salty that he's not named Joseph, by the way, but he says that the next boy can be named Joseph. But how beautiful to be sent such a gift from God in the form of a dream. And in the Bible, actually, Joseph is one of the only people that's communicated with via dream, both Old Testament and New Testament Joseph.
Sure.
So to have such a powerful spiritual experience that brought such peace, I mean, glory
to
to
top
God,
that.
right? It's
Yeah.
hard to top that.
Well, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing set of stories.
It is.
And I know listeners have been both entertained and informed and empowered just by listening. Thank you for sharing it.
You are so welcome.
Thanks for
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I've enjoyed listening to it and bringing it to you. Do you have a story that you'd like to tell, even if it's not as colorful and as exciting as this one? We'd love to hear from you. You can email me at drstroud@fertilityandmidwifery.com. That's DRSTROUD. You can message me directly, 260-450-8878. We'd love to hear from you. And a very special thank you to our friends here at Spoke Street Media, without whom this podcast would just be impossible. You can see an amazing collection of authentically Catholic content at spokestreet.com. Check them out. You will not be disappointed. So thanks again for listening to us at All Things Women's Health. I hope you'll tell your friends to like and share the podcast, and I hope you'll join us again for a future episode. We look forward to having you. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stroud.